Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for your attendance and making the time to join this webinar. We're delighted to announce that we've had 50 people show interest, so hopefully you'll find this worthwhile. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Simon Antwis. Also here is Trevor Greenhill, and we're very lucky to have Matt Wells as the Head of Education at Norwich City Academy. The title of the webinar is How to Put Player Mental Health and Wellbeing at the Centre of Your Sporting Culture, and could steer be one of your marginal gains. Just to let you know, we're recording this webinar and we will follow up with all of you with an email which include this recording and these slides and our contact details. Please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom to ask any questions as we go through. There is a section at the end of the webinar to address those questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. Firstly, just quickly introduce myself. I'm a biology teacher by trade initially, evolved into a games teacher as such, if that's what you want to call it. I was first 11 football coach for a while, which I loved, did a bit of rugby and a bit of cricket as well. I was lucky enough to somehow elevate to head teacher of 3 all-through schools, right from nursery through to sixth form. And I launched steer tracking in 2 of those schools and helped to launch it across the school group that I belong to called Cognita to significant effect, which I'll talk about in a moment. I'm now Senior Education Consultant with Steer Education. I'm a sports nut, during medicines. I'm also passionate about mental health and well-being of young people, as we all are at Steer Education.
Hi, I'm Trevor.
My colleague Trevor will introduce himself.
Thank you. So I've been a teacher for 33 years, both of geography and PE. I was head of football at a school in London for 9 years, and then head of rugby for a school in Somerset for 15 years. At that school, I worked with a lot of rugby internationals and schoolboy internationals, an incredibly talented group. And had the privilege to coach a lot of national trophy winning teams during that time. I use Steer in my school, and I've currently worked for Steer for 6 years and with 5 years with Premier League academies. Over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Trevor. So who are Steer Education? What's our purpose, vision and mission? Well, we exist to enable the science of cognitive steering to have greatest possible positive impact on humanity. And our vision is that we will be the custodian of cognitive steering and will lead and manage how steering occurs in the world. And finally, and most importantly, our mission is to help proactively safeguard young people's mental health wherever they are. We offer a range of products. Our main one is steer tracking, which Trevor will go through with you in his session. We also have a module called safeguarding, which allows you to measure a child's mental health well-being outside your academy, as well as inside, to be able to compare. We also have a module called school impacts, which allows you to look at your school or your organisation or your group of academies as a whole. We have PSHE in families, which is a module that helps you to deliver PSHE in schools, but also to help you action plan with families and involve them in any interventions. And finally, USteer is a product we produce for children and young people 16 plus. We're also looking at launching that and modelling it 18 plus, and we're getting some help with that in terms of trials from some other sporting organisations. Thank you for that. And that's how children can take ownership of their own self-regulation, steering and mental health and well-being. We're also an organisation that produces research. We've used all the data from all of our schools, anonymously of course, and produced national reports which have been taken up by the broadsheets, ITV News and TES and other notable media outlets. On the left is a graph that shows the relationship between children who are on an EHCP, so children with severe SEN needs, and those children who aren't. So the red line is for children without special needs, and the green line is for children with special needs. And we measured their ability to self-regulate, in other words, their mental health and well-being, before, during, and after the pandemic. That's what the 3 points are. And you can see the green line is going down, which means those children that are on EHCP actually dysregulated less during the pandemic. So that was a really notable trend. And we've got some reasons why we think that is, that the children who are on those plans responded better to the hybrid learning, the closing of schools, working remotely, their differing relationship with their TA, and so on. On the right is a report we produced looking at the impact again on young people before, during, and after the pandemic on their mental health and well-being, and it was comparing girls with boys. The red lines are the girls, and they're going to the left, and the blue lines are for the boys, and they're going to the right. And that shows you that the girls dysregulated much more than the boys during the pandemic. In fact, the boys showed better self-regulation during the pandemic. They preferred the lockdown conditions and the way that they interacted with social media and the way they use it as a transactional tool, whereas girls didn't. And we're noticing that girls are taking longer to recover from the pandemic. So that's the sort of thing we do as an organisation, as well as our tools. We produce this sort of research. Next slide, please, John. We also produce thought pieces and blogs and insight, and all our interactions with the media and things that we produce, the national reports, are available on our website. And there's just an example of a few of the things. It's all based around young people's mental health and well-being, and empowering schools and academies like the ones that you run, how to navigate the world of mental health and well-being and how to improve the lives of young people. Thanks, Trevor. So what is steer tracking in a nutshell? So steer tracking is an evidence-based tool to measure, track, and improve how each young person self-regulates 4 factors which are fundamental to well-being and good mental health. Steer tracking uniquely identifies hidden social emotional risks that might otherwise go undetected, equipping teachers to proactively target their support and measure impact. What are the 4 factors? Well, they are firstly self-disclosure, so that willingness or that ability for a child to share what they're thinking or what they're saying or what they're doing with others. The second one is trust of self, which I think is self-explanatory. The third one is trust of others, again, it speaks for itself. And the fourth one is seeking change, the ability to which a child or young person wants to change everything all the time or not change it at all, and where are they on that scale? So young people are asked to imagine a space. They're sat down with headphones and a device. It can even be a phone, and they're asked to imagine a space where they feel at their best and they're most comfortable. They are then given a 10-minute, 15-minute assessment. It's about 16 questions, and it can be repeated once to gather data inside your academy. So when they're at the academy, so they imagine the space at the academy, and that might be the sports pitch, or it might be the changing rooms, or it might be a particular place that they sit. And then they're asked to imagine a space outside the academy, and there might be home or the garden or a park or somewhere where they feel at their happiest. And they're asked 16 questions about those spaces. This allows leaders to measure academy impact. So is there a difference between a child's ability to self-regulate inside your academy compared to out? Is the mental health and well-being better inside your academy than out? And that can be a positive metric for your academy. So as I said, 16 questions about that space help the tool determine a value for each factor. So they're given a score 0 to 15 for each of those 4 factors, and Trevor will show you those in a moment. If they're down at the 0, 1, 2 end of that scale, we call that polar low. If they're up at the 13, 14, 15 end of that scale, we call that polar high. And we think children are in those spaces, those polar low or polar high, we think that's a red flag. And if they are in those polar regions for 2 or more of the 4 factors, we will flag them to you as the leader of the academy and say, we think this child, if not already, are at social emotional risk. You can also have combinations of scores that can give us cause for concern as well. We call them composite biases. So high trust of self, low trust of others, or the other way around, we think is a concerning combination. Polar high trust of self, polar low trust of others. And Trevor will talk to you about those in a moment. Attached to the tool is an action planning toolkit that allows you or your staff very quickly in 10 minutes to put together action plans based around that data and some contextual information that you add to the tool to put interventions in place for what we call those priority young people. So that's how the tool works. I used it in two schools. It was had significant impact, not just on well-being, but on academic outcomes, attendance and behaviour, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So what are the aims of this webinar? Firstly, to allow you an opportunity to see STEER and to demonstrate how it might help brand your club and its commitment to safeguarding young people, to increase trust in your organisation and to attract young people to join your academy. We believe also that good steering, as we call it, that ability to regulate, self-regulate, could be a marginal gain in terms of elite sports performance, and I'll touch on that in a minute. We also think it's a chance for you to be seen as sector-leading, trailblazing in terms of monitoring player welfare and well-being, which I know you all take really, really seriously. Thank you, Trevor. I want to draw your attention now to my belief that there's a strong connection between ability for a child to self-regulate, their mental health and well-being, and performance. So in my case, it was academic performance, but we remain convinced, and we've got good evidence, it also affects sporting performance too. This is an infographic. Again, you'll get this in the pack after the webinar. And it was a study performed by Oxford University. In fact, Dr. Ariel Lindorf, Department of Education, University of Oxford. It's a really interesting read. It's all summarized there in that graphic. Essentially, what she concluded is that the better a child's well-being, the better their performance in the classroom. And we strongly believe that can be translated into sports academies as well. Thank you, Trevor. This is another interesting paper you might want to read. It's produced by Public Health England. It was a study looking at the link between pupil health and well-being and attainment in schools. Again, the links will be sent to you in the emails afterwards. But the yellow areas I'd like to highlight. Value added is the amount is to the extent to which a child outperforms themselves. So you would measure the baseline for a child, teach them for 5 or 7 years, they take an exam, and you compare that result with what they should have got. So schools that are getting exactly what a child should get will have a value added of 0. Schools that are doing better will have a value added in the plus area, and schools that are underperforming, the minus figures. But you can see there that pupils with a better emotional well-being at age 7 had a value added at key stage 2 of 2.46. You may not know what that number means, but essentially it means that child is 1 term ahead in terms of all the other children in the UK. So that's the value added. The second one, pupils with no attention problems at age 13, good well-being, had a total value added GCSE score that's equivalent to more than 1 extra GCSE grade at A star. So all your children getting 1 grade higher than they should be getting compared to the UK average. Next slide, please, John. So this is a summary of the impact on performance. So here you can see 2 of our factors, healthy self-disclosure, healthy trust of self. To the left, it shows you a child's behaviours and what you'll see in the classroom if they are polar low self-disclosure. And to the right, you'll see how they behave in the classroom or in your academy if they are polar high self-disclosure. Next slide, please, Trevor. And those are the other 2 factors, healthy trust of others and healthy seeking change. Again, they have descriptions of what you'll see from that child in those particular, who have those particular biases and how it affects them in the classroom. I want to focus on one in particular. Next slide, please, Trevor. Because this is what happened in my school. So when I used STEER in one of my schools, we identified that year 9 girls had polar low trust of self as a group. And what that meant is, and I'll read these out, they were self-doubting and self-critical, dismissing learning strengths and successes. They were easily influenced by what others think, feel, or do in the class. In-class behaviours were designed to seek or avoid attention. This is a critical one, I think, particularly for academies, sports academies. They are overly sensitive to feedback. And finally, limited learner efficacy and resilience, easily defeated or overwhelmed. So what I did as a head teacher was I tasked all my staff to address that. How can we put right this polar low trust of self? So we put an action plan in place for the entire group. And what we noticed was it has not only did it have a significant effect on well-being and mental health, their value added changed as well. It improved over time. So I remain convinced that there is a distinct, bold line between good steering, good self-regulation, healthy well-being and mental health, and the ability to perform, whether that's in a classroom or a sports academy. Over to Trevor.
Thank you. I've been working with Premier League academies for about 5 years. But before I go through the data, I'd just like to explain how I arrived at this point. So I came across Steer after being a teacher for 30 years. I was a head of year and a boarding housemaster for 19 years with my wife running the house. As in all the best ideas, my wife researched and found Steer and then presented it to me. And I then used it within my boarding house. As a personality, I see the potential in every child that I've ever taught over that 30-year period. I'm incredibly positive about what young people can achieve, and every child is unique. And I've worked with a lot of, as I mentioned previously, a lot of talented sports people, and Steer enabled me to just improve. When I saw the first round data for those in my care, I actually learned a little bit of humility. I spent a huge amount of time with young people, speaking to them, just being there for them. But there were still things that I missed. And so the first assessment of Steer revealed what I was missing and then enabled me to put things in place to support those young people. It's just about knowing each child. They say you can't respect anybody more than really listening to them. And the Steer assessment really listens to that child to show you how they are self-regulating. And so my contact with the Premier League came via just pieces in the press, and I made contact. I spent some time with Paul Stewart, who a lot of you will know, and he recognised that this would have identified those issues he'd been through earlier. So I'm very passionate about it from a safeguarding point of view. And then the recent press piece from Trent Alexander-Arnold discussing the journey of his peers through the academy very much touches me all the time. So onto the data. So what you'll see in front of you there is obviously the data is anonymized for each academy. It's anonymized, so we at Steer don't know who the players are. And if you're concentrating on an individual player here, you can see this young person has very low self-disclosure and a polar end seeking change. Now, where somebody has very low self-disclosure, that is a bias that is only temporary, and if it is worked on, a plan is put in place. And I've discussed with coaches at clubs putting a plan in place to support a young player. This player may be the loudest player in the squad, but he isn't revealing what he's really thinking or feeling, either outside of the club or inside of the club. So it's a matter of just putting a plan in place. Perhaps he's the person who picks up the cones at the end of the session. Perhaps it's so the coach can find a little bit of time with him, or the welfare lead has more conversations with this player and gradually gets them to reveal what they're really thinking and feeling. And without that full level of self-disclosure, the player isn't going to ask questions, isn't going to inquire, isn't going to make full use of what is provided at the academy level. And likewise, with a lower seeking change, they're not going to push themselves to expand their boundaries and really develop. So it's about this one player coming around them and supporting them, and then tracking their data over a period of time. The second player here has very high self-disclosure, so very little filter. That can have an impact on teammates, where the player can say things that others perhaps don't want to hear. And a healthy self-disclosure, you balance between sharing what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. And the player here has got a very low trust of self. So this is a player who may not present as that. They may present as very, very connected. And as you can see, their trust of others is high. So they're relying on affirmation for others, sharing with information all the time. They may appear to be a bubbly, enthusiastic person, but beneath the surface, there are issues that are hidden that need to be improved if that player is going to achieve their potential. When looking at the Premier League and the academy clubs that we work with, the percentage of players identified with this red flag is between 1% and depending on the club and the round of assessment. That's compared to 13.4%, which is the number of priority pupils identified across all of our schools. So the care within the Premier League clubs, I'm very, very happy to evidence, is excellent. But that's not a reason to not try and improve it further. So the next set of slides here is talking of Paul Stewart earlier on, is very much concentrating when I speak to the safeguarding leads at clubs is about the trust of others. So what I've seen uniformly across the clubs is that there's a very high trust, or a healthy high trust, of those in the clubs. So if this data was down at 0.1 within the club, you'd be aware that there's somebody or a group that player isn't trusting. And consistently, that's not the case across the clubs. The one area I'll just draw your attention to is where that player has got a very, very high trust of others, he's likely to be more easily led. So in terms of an indicator to be aware of, and obviously we were just talking about improving that trust of self by putting a plan in place, but it's giving that player very positive feedback, even if they don't seem like the sort of person who requires that positive feedback. They're saying, where they're revealing through the assessment that they lack that belief in their self, a division of a clear boundary around who they are. Now, the composite biases that Simon mentioned earlier on, there are 5. In all my time working with the clubs, only 2 have appeared in the academies. The first one you can see is overregulation, and the second one is social naivety. Where somebody is overregulating, they are evaluating, thinking things through very, very carefully, using a lot of energy as they make decisions on a daily basis. When you're trying to improve in something, it's obviously you want to consider and improve and change how you do things. So that's a very natural part of it. But the very best players who are regulating healthily do that by not over-regulating. It's a more natural process for them, whereas those that identify as over-regulating are draining themselves a little bit more, and it can eventually lead to an emotional crash. So as you track the players over time, you want to monitor those who are over-regulating and again, develop a plan to come alongside them to just let them steer, if you like, through their life in a way that isn't using extra energy. The second one is social naivety, and as you'll see in the next slide, those players who are performing at the highest level are likely to have scores similar to those with social naivety. So social naivety is them not necessarily seeing the consequence of what's in their way, what's ahead of them. They're just very much living in the moment without considering what's next. So again, you need to scaffold those young people, make them think about their life moving forward, what's ahead of them, what's next. Otherwise, it'll become a shock to them. And then lastly, this has been of great interest to me with working with the clubs over the last 5 or 6 years. And I've just anecdotally, when going through a tutorial after each round of assessment with the club, asked which players would be perhaps the best 3 in each year group. And you can see that the data has been incredibly consistent. There are no red biases on those players performing at the highest level. They are self-disclosing healthily, engaging with those around them, sharing how they're feeling, discussing what they want to improve. So the self-disclosure is that high, healthy level. The trust of self is also at the high end. So they have a clear sense of who they are, what they want to do, the direction their life is moving in. But it also allows them, when you've got a healthy trust of self, to allow room for others to come in and be part of your life. And likewise, the trust of others is again at that higher, healthy end, where they're cooperating with those around them, but value those around them very much. The story with one player at one of the clubs who had a very high trust of self, but a very low trust of others, and he was the captain of the team. And I spoke to the psychologist, club psychologist, post-assessment, and they said, well, it's just not working with him leading the team. What does your data say? And I said, well, it shows that he has a very clear sense of who he is, but he isn't valuing the others, and they sense that. So there's research beyond my remit here at clubs that are using this data to work out how teams work. We look at Manchester City and a club moving in the right direction where the players get on and value each other's. There may be potential here to measure how that works with teams and cooperation and achieving more than the sum of the parts. So just a couple of thoughts to finish. Obviously, players start at 8 years old and they move forward through the academy, and there's a time when they leave. Supporting a player when they leave in the first 2 years via the assessment is a potential way that this tool can be used. The take the wheel, when the player reaches 16, they can be given access to their data and then therefore given greater self-awareness. And likewise, there's the U-Steer app that Simon mentioned earlier in the introduction that can be used by players to guide their own self-regulation over a period of time. And we're very hopeful that we'll be moving into rugby soon, exploring the use of U-Steer to raise performance. So, but before I hand over to Matt, I've worked with Matt for 3 years now. Previously, I worked with him and Karis, who moved to Chelsea and took Steer with her, and also with Dean, who was one of the coaches who moved to Ipswich. So it's a great recommendation that he also took it with him as well. So I'm very grateful to Matt because he's the person you're going to listen to because he's the real voice of a club. So if I hand over him to now, thanks, Matt.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Trevor and Simon, for welcoming me today and giving me an opportunity to share our experiences of this fantastic tool. For those of you that don't know me, I've been at Norwich City for 4 years now. Previous employment was in schools, senior leaders in both primary and secondary education. And I also was involved with the first full-time programme at Norwich City as assistant principal at a previous high school. So I've been on both sides of the fence, and I understand how this can be used to help performance and drive up standards across the clubs. I think Steer, the first thing that attracted me to Steer Global when I first got shown it was how proactive it was and what a massive proactive tool it could be for highlighting pastoral needs of players. And what we're looking at today is just looking at how we've used it at Norwich, to what benefits we've found from it at Norwich, and how we're looking and the strategies that we're going to look to drive it forwards. So as I said, I think it's a fantastic tool, and it was a frustration of mine whilst in education that we seem to react to pastoral needs too late, and this tool can highlight the pastoral needs that individuals and young people need before they become huge, and then we can work together to make sure that they are improved. Next slide, please, Trevor. And one more click. Okay, so thinking of audit in mind, and what we're looking, I'm going to go through how we use it at Norwich and what benefits we get from that. So first of all, it does give the players a voice. It gives them an opportunity to share how they're feeling without knowing that they're giving a voice about how they're feeling. So the questions are really well designed to allow the players to share what they're feeling both inside and outside of the academy. So we've invested in or we use both tools, so we know that how they're feeling outside our walls as well as inside. And they don't really know what they're answering, so they can give a real good indication of their program, a real good indication of what's going on in their lives. So player voice is something that we've recognised that this tool can use and can support us when we're sort of going through audit and supporting the young people. Next click, please. Our safeguarding team use this. I don't know why that's gone on to blue, but our safeguarding team use this data really well, and Trevor has spoken to both our head of safeguarding across the club and safeguarding within the academy, head of safeguarding in the academy, and they use the data again as a proactive tool. It highlights any potential concerns within the young people that we're working with, both inside and outside the academy. And it just gives them a bit of an overview about how the cohort are feeling. We made a decision to just jump in with this, and we work with all of our under 9s all the way up to our under 18s with this program. They take the questionnaire 3 times a season. It takes about maximum of 10 minutes for the players. A lot of them do it in a lot shorter time, and as they become more used to it, it becomes quicker for them to access. So it's a really short, sharp, but it gives us really, really good detail. So our safeguarding team utilize the data and work proactively with the young people. Next one, please. Again, while we're on the call, and why we felt as a club and as an academy to sort of invest in our time and resources in this, was the emotional well-being of the young people. Our player care department again scrutinised the data, and Trevor did some fantastic sessions with us as a multidisciplinary team. But the player care team, as he mentioned, that Carrie's taken it with her to Chelsea, and a new player care department now. They look at the data and they look at trends, and we're starting to use it at more readily at transition points now. So we're hopefully going to use this tool, use Steer, to, if a player is released or their journey ends with us, can we still use Steer Global to see how they're getting on outside once the support from the academy has stopped within the building? How are they feeling after that, and for up to 3 years after that? So this tool can be used with the recommendations in mind that every young person should be, in fact, for 3 years after they've been released from an academy. We feel this tool can be used for that if players and parents are willing to carry on. What we found, that it gives a real pastoral baseline. So the data we get from each individual, each round of each cohort, each individual set of data gives us a pastoral baseline, which we haven't really had before. It's how the players are feeling, and it's difficult to get within education, within the club, about what they're feeling and what how their well-being is. And in education, you can get a baseline of how well they're doing academically, but that's the biggest benefit for us, is we've got this baseline now, and then we can respond as a multidisciplinary team, as professionals working with young people, to build and increase the emotional support that the players from under 9 to under 18 can get. MDT discussions then occur, and for me, that's the so what question. Throughout my sort of teaching career and career at Norwich, we always sort of say now, so what we've got this data, so what we understand that the under 9s are feeling this, or this individual is feeling this. If we didn't have those MDT discussions and we didn't buy in as a group about what the players need, then the data is almost irrelevant. If it's just one person within the academy saying, oh, these persons are like, these individuals are feeling this, or this group are feeling this, without the MDT discussions and without the MDT interventions, the data's not there. So we talk through the data, we highlight any priority pupils, and we discuss strategies around what we can do with them. And what I found in the action planning for using this tool is very, very simple to use, and it's very simple to implement. And for instance, we had a player who had a very high trust of others, and we decided as a multidisciplinary team within the academy had a very high trust of others. Within the multidisciplinary team, that we would ask, what do you think? So every professional, every adult he worked with during the time he was there, so the sports science team, the coaching team, up in education, player care, the question was, what do you think? That's a very simple intervention for that young person to experience. And if everybody's using the same language with him, that the trust of others dropped, but not to a negative level, but it dropped to a more healthy level. And because he was being asked, what do you think, and he was having to respond, that was a really good positive outcome for that individual. There was another case study of a young player in under 14 who had a really low self-disclosure score at the start of under 14 level. We picked that up really quickly. Conversations with parents, conversations with schools about what the young person was like. He was on the verge at that point of being released from the academy. Following the conversations with parents, with schools, we were able to ascertain that he struggles with change, really difficult struggle with change. So having new coaches, starting a new season, starting again effectively, and his attitude towards his peers was quite negative. So we put a strategy in place where everybody within the building would ensure that he was given opportunity to work with others. The coaches took a little bit of time to get their arm around him at the end of every session and say, "How's it going? Are you okay?" To give him that opportunity to speak to the coaches. And as the season went on, his self-disclosure, we could see a really good improvement in his self-disclosure. Went from very low to a healthy level by the end of the season. So it just shows that the program is working, and the learning environment, as number 5 states there, the learning environment that these young people are getting is really good. And as Trevor said within his presentation, it does highlight and it enables me to speak to the coaches about what they're doing, because majority of the time they're obviously with the coaches. It's a really good learning environment, and it's really important that they understand that, and the young people understand what we're doing. And then the final one is curriculum design. So what we're looking at now is, if we've got, as Simon mentioned about the Year 9 girls in his school, if we've got a group of individuals, or we've got a group of a certain squad that are displaying positive polar low or polar high in any of the 4 areas, we can look at our life skills program and make it more bespoke to them, so that they get that intervention and that support that they need. So it's a real good wraparound tool to enable every person within the multidisciplinary team to have discussions with the young person at the centre of the intervention, at the centre of everything that we kind of do. So we've found it invaluable. We've been using it for 3 years now. So some of our players have got 9 sets of data, and it's been really interesting to track how they have responded to the interventions that we've put in place, and how they are moving through the academy and the outside the academy as well. So thank you very much for inviting me, Simon and Trevor.
Thank you, Matt. That was a fantastic insight into how it looks in actuality in a successful sports academy. So thank you so much for your input and adding that authenticity. We really appreciate that. In a previous life, I was a school inspector, and I know that not only schools but sports academies have to ensure that they address certain key safeguarding documents. And I know that and Matt would be able to tell you this, that using steer data is very useful in helping to address some of those key criteria that you're asked to meet by safeguarding auditors or whoever it may be that is in charge of that in your association or governing body. Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. We're an organisation with a real soul. All of us are ex-educationalists. We do this for the love of young people, and as the mission statement said, to do all we can to address the mental health and wellbeing issue across the UK and beyond. Also, we're a commercial organisation, and therefore we do charge for this. And because we're open, we'd like to share that cost with you straight away. We charge £2,500 per academy, plus a training cost on that, plus VAT. We are aware that a lot of you are relying on funding from your associations or governing bodies or overarching organisations.
Simon, sorry, the screen isn't sharing now. I don't know if I can't see the slides.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, sorry.
Understood. That is our £2,500 is our category 1 price. We are prepared to have conversations with any academies who have a different categorisation or any other contextual information that would help us come with an appropriate and fair price. So the last part of the session is for any questions to be asked, Q&A. We've had one already, which is from Christian Davis, which I'll share with you. Asked, how often do you assess and then review the level of impact of the action plan? I think Matt referenced this. We recommend to our schools and our academies at least twice, if not 3 times a year or season. The data can be reviewed each time. As part of the training that you'll get to help you launch, embed and culturalize this, you'll get help to analyze the data in the first year, and that can be done after each data round. We believe that is the right cadence to allow time for any action plans or interventions to take effect and to be able to measure their impact. So that's answers that question. I think we've got one more in the box. No, that's Simon Walker, who's our founder, answering the same question.
Can I add on that, Simon? Sorry, that we do it 3 times a year at Norwich, but we found that putting the intervention in place as soon as close to that intervention or as close as to a questionnaire as possible had the most positive effects. We've tried sending it out to players to do it at school or players to do it at home, and then it's delayed the response coming back in. So we do it within the academy now. We find 10 minutes 3 times a season to get the questionnaire done, and then we meet as an MDT the week after and discuss what we've seen. So it's really fresh and it's really relevant, and that's what we found has had the biggest impact.
That's a great point, Matt. Thank you, because I appreciate the academies don't have the children all the time. So I'm just looking at the question and answer box. I can't see any questions coming in at the moment. If you do have a question, then now's your time to ask by clicking on the Q&A box. If not, it just remains for me to thank all of you who attended. We've had a great number of attendants. Thank you very much. We do appreciate you've got busy lives. Thank you very much to Matt for his time and speaking so positively about the tool, and to Trevor for his input on the data. We hope it's been of some value to you. A question has just come in from Carol Baker. Do you limit the number of people per academy? No, the price that I've quoted is for your entire academy. So if there's no further questions, have a great weekend when it comes. Thank you for your attendance. We will follow up this with an email. A PowerPoint will be sent to you with all the links as well, and we will send you a recording if you arrive late or if one of your colleagues wasn't able to attend and you want to share it. Thanks very much and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.